everybody. This is Jason Augustus Newcomb, and I want to welcome you to Inside the Magic Circle. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with someone who is genuinely a person who I very much look up to on a lot of different levels. This is a gentleman who has been writing occult books literally since the year I was born, 1972, and he has he's been a huge inspiration in a lot of occult movements that have taken place, from the growth of Solomonic magic to the growth of Enochian magic, in its more traditional sense rather than just the Golden Dawn versions of it. He's also I believe he's the first person to ever publish a book on Feng Shui in English. So basically introduced the concept of Feng Shui to the English-speaking world. So this is a legend. I'm sure you've all figured out who I'm talking about. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Stephen Skinner. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, good morning, or in your case, good evening.
Yes, we're talking at very different times because he lives in Singapore. So hopefully we aren't going to have too many technical problems in this interview.
No,
so
it'll be smooth.
To begin with, so you began your occult writing career as a fairly young man. That your first book was it the Search for Abraxas, or is that correct, or
yeah,
Abrasac?
Search for Abraxas.
Yeah.
But I started writing in the early 1960s.
So, I mean, as a teenager, basically, yes?
Yeah. And my interest in magic extends back to my early teens. In fact, I can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in it.
Do you remember what sort of stimulated that interest? Because there was a lot less sort of stimulus toward that then, right? There's a lot less literature since you've contributed so much of it.
And it was frowned upon quite a lot in those days.
Yeah, I'm curious about, you've gotten to watch the academic research into the field of magic go from being like, that's not really something that we're interested in having anyone do, to it really being a fairly mainstream and accepted part of, academia at this point, to the point where you basically have a PhD on the subject in a sense.
Well, no, I don't. I've actually got a PhD in classical languages.
Yeah. But based on research into magical texts, so.
Yes, yeah. and that was a difficult one to sell to the university.
It still was.
They had to say, do you believe in this? I said, no, I'm purely looking at it from a linguistic and philological point of view. And they sort of, well, okay. So that was difficult.
I've read your thesis, and I actually think that you did a wonderful job of both handling the fact that academia doesn't really want you to believe in things, while at the same time providing sort of enough information that a person who is interested in it from a more practical and esoteric point of view still has something to sink their teeth into. I mean, it really is. It's a pretty good read. I mean, it's been sort of expanded into 2 books. So, but yeah, it's a good thesis.
Thank you. The books are more readable than the thesis. And
well, I mean, yes.
Writing the thesis was walking a very razor-sharp line between not getting my degree and getting my degree, and still being honest to the subject. So there you go.
Well, we'll get back to this in a couple of minutes here, but I want to. So, as a young man, how did you discover that there was something called magic to be interested in?
Well, like I said, I can't remember when I first started being interested in magic. But the clincher was wandering into the local library when I was a very shy boy. And I decided to look at the first books inside the door rather than exploring deeper into the library. And the first books inside the door on the left-hand side was 133.4, which anybody who's looked at Dewey classification in the library will know as magic.
Interesting.
And so I started borrowing those, and this was a real mind opener. And from then on, there was no stopping.
Do you remember what any of those books were?
The initial ones were historic witchcraft stuff. Like you say, there weren't many books on magic and or how to do it in those days, because it was looked upon as something you didn't do. It was something you looked at under a microscope and kept your distance from.
Yeah.
So if you want me to quote titles.
No. Just the fact that it was sort of history of witchcraft stuff that was first on your mind. And
that's more than half a century ago, so I can't really.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it. Your writing career, if we include the 1960s, is that 6 decades that you've been writing, or 7?
I'm
60s,
72 at the
70s,
moment.
80s, 90s,
So,
7.
yeah,
7.
so
It's gone 7 decades.
getting close to 7 decades.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're moving into the 7th right now. So
it started with a pen, and then a Smith Corona portable typewriter. So that some of my early books, there are not even digital copies of them until they were pirated. Then I got digital copies that way.
you've gotten them from the pirates who
Yes,
photocopied them.
yes,
Yeah, I've
yes.
got a couple of my books that way too. Where I've got when I'm looking for something, I can't find the book, so I go, okay, let me find a pirated copy of the new Hermetics on the internet. Your second book, which I actually have here, the Techniques of High Magic.
Mm-hmm.
This book is interesting because the majority of your career seems to be more focused on sort of classical grimoire studies and that related field. But this is very much a Golden Dawn oriented book in a lot of ways. And was that because that was the literature that was available, or is that because of Francis King's interest was in that, or was that because there really wasn't a Golden Dawn or an OTO even at this point? I mean, not actively anyway. So how did you come to this?
Let me take you back to the first
Sure.
question. Yes, it was. Well, I was always involved. I wasn't involved directly with the Golden Dawn, but those are the few books around. Like I can't remember. Maybe people like Taurus and something written about the Golden Dawn, but certainly. But in that book that you just held up, there is a chapter on the Goetia, on evocation.
Yes.
And so even at that stage, that was part of it. And things like astral projection were the things I was interested in. But before that, I'd done a couple of editions of Crowley's books. I did his astrology and one of his diaries, the diaries that he kept when he was living in Tunisia after.
Was that the Magical Diaries of the B66, or is that the other diary bit that's published?
No, that's Magical Diaries of the B666. That was Simmons and Grant.
Mm-hmm.
No, I picked up one part that hadn't been published, which was the Tunisian Diaries, 1923. I
think I have that one too, actually, believe it or not. So, your interest in Aleister Crowley was academic, or was he sort of the magician that everyone was aware of, or was he still a little bit more of a misunderstood person at that point? Or
no, I was reading. I found John Simon's biography of Crowley in the school library, for which I'm very grateful. When I was just in prep school, so I was reading that very early on.
Really?
Reading in the train going to school. So I've always been interested in Crowley. But getting back to that book, Francis started working on that book, and he was looking at it purely from a pre-Golden Dawn basis. And he got writer's block, and the publisher phoned me up and said, would you like to help finish this book? And
interesting.
Got the stuff that he'd written. He'd written about 20% of it. And I finished the rest. But the publisher said, oh, you've got 1 year to finish it. So I procrastinate a lot. So I thought, okay, I'll do it later in the year. And so he rings me about 6 months. Oh, I've just about half finished it. I hadn't started at that point. And then 9 months. Well, yeah, I'm almost there. And then 11 months. And then he rings me up one day and says, oh, there's an American publisher coming out to see if they want to buy rights to it. We've got to have we've got to have the manuscript next week.
So you're saying you wrote this in a week, or wrote 80% of this in a week?
Yes, I did. I sat down. I convinced 3 girlfriends to type for me, because this is still typing on portable typewriters.
Sure, yeah.
During the day, I would dictate or handwrite stuff, and the night I would correct stuff that they'd been typing. And so I finished the whole thing in exactly 6.5 days. Grabbed a taxi, took it to the publisher's office, passed it across the desk. The publisher's wife came in and said, you look terrible, what's wrong? I've been working hard. I then went home, collapsed and slept for 2 days.
Wow.
But
So
it got done.
in that time period, what was your sort of magical life looking like? Were you performing rituals similar to the ones that were in that book, or were you doing other things? Or?
Yeah. I was just doing talismans, basic Golden Dawn Crowley stuff. I was also doing yoga. I was privileged to know one of the guys. I lived in Australia then, who was a teacher of yoga teachers, and so he put me through that fairly rigorously, so I could identify it with Crowley, who also got keen on yoga when he was in Kandy in Sri Lanka. More recently, I went back to Kandy just to see where he'd been hanging out at the time. It's a beautiful, peaceful place.
So you're a fan of his, if not really involved in Thelema that much, but you're interested in him.
I'm a fan of his intellect. I'm not a fan of his poetry. That's a bit over the top and Victorian.
Yes, you are.
I'm not a fan of the fact that he helped to break up the Golden Dawn, taking up in Blythe Road, dressed in a kilt and carrying a claymore or whatever, things like that. I'm not a fan of the fact that he stole Mather's copy of the Goetia and then published it over his own name. He was a bit of a rat as a man.
Yeah.
His old trick of going out to dinner with half a dozen of his friends, and at the end of the dinner, offering to pay, of course. At the end of the dinner, he produces a £100 note, and the restaurant cannot, in those days, cash it.
Deal with that.
So they take up a collection and pay for it, and Crowley gets a free meal. He was a bit of a con man and a bit
scoundrel. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, he was a scoundrel. That's a nice Victorian word. But on the more serious side about his magic, I think he missed a few turnings. He didn't complete many of the magical operations he started.
Yeah.
And so he didn't get the benefit from them. I know it's almost heresy to criticize Crowley, but I'm going to criticize Crowley.
I know. I think that's a fair thing to say. I think that if he were sober and being honest in a therapy session, he might admit the same thing. That he didn't finish a lot of stuff that he started.
Crowley would never have gone for a therapy session.
Probably not. No, he would have offered one.
Actually, he was very impressed by psychology. So that was one of the problems with his work later. He took a psychological approach. I'm going to tread on your toes a little bit. I don't believe that magic is psychology. I believe it's completely different.
I absolutely want to support you in expressing that point of view, and I don't know that I completely dispute it. I just what the issue that I take up with some people is that people want to take this either or kind of attitude that there's no psychology in anything, or it's 100% spirits, or vice versa.
No.
I don't think anyone feels that way.
Let's restate that. There's psychology in all sorts of things, and psychology has done many good things. It's failed to live up to its initial promises, because psychology cannot cure many mental illnesses.
Right, but I mean, initiatory magic has failed in that way too. In a lot of ways, there's very few saints that have been produced by the esoteric orders of the last 100 years. So.
Yeah, because they were claiming to do something that they really were not set up for.
Yes.
Anyway, getting back to psychology for a minute. There's a lot of psychological practices like, well, I'm sure you'll agree, NLP, which are effective and useful for what they are, but they are not magic. And when people say they're magic, that's just messing up the meaning of words. It's like the word awesome. Awesome used to mean something worthy of respect and rather fearful, but now awesome is a word used for anything.
Sure. I think it's cool or fun.
But anyway, sorry, getting back to psychology, you can do a lot of good things with psychological methods. You can even encourage the outside world to give you things, but you can't get the almost instantaneous 2 or 3 day effects that are just unbelievable, that is still in the province of magic. I can see from your eyes that you don't entirely agree with me, but that's fine.
Well, I think the only thing I don't agree with entirely is just that you can't have that awesome experience from something that is more of an inner transformation. And I also think that, like, there are some psychological techniques, even within NLP, that actually do fairly closely map with magic. Like, for instance, there's an older technique that most people don't really use in NLP anymore called 6-step reframing. And basically what you do in that particular thing is that you identify a part within your consciousness that is responsible for something, and you have a conversation with it, and you basically negotiate a change. And the difference between that and the majority of spirit work is not all that much, except for the fact that you're not identifying a spirit outside of yourself as the entity. But there's no, like, that basic technique, that technology is essentially the same. You are, seeking something out, communicating with it, and negotiating for what it is that you want to have happen. Also, Jung's active imagination, I think, approximates a significant portion of some kinds of magic as well.
Yeah,
so
you can make a lot of very good changes with that kind of psychology, definitely. But I'm just an old-fashioned guy, and my head is probably still stuck in the 17th century.
And what I want to hear about is your opinions. Don't worry about how I feel about stuff, because this isn't about me at all. So what I really want to hear is your, let's talk about this. When you are actively doing magical work, which I know you're not allowed to admit that you do, but let's just pretend that you do for a moment.
We can admit that.
Now that you have your PhD, you're fine. You're out of the broom closet. And you can admit that you're flying around on broomsticks when you're not writing your thesis or dissertation, excuse me. So when you're doing a magical operation to communicate with a spirit, what do you think that spirit is that you're communicating with, just from your perspective?
A separate entity.
Okay, but what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay, go. Okay, sorry.
So I quite often, as a parallel, equate calling spirits to taming wild horses. You can go into the mountains and find a wild horse, snag it, and then tame it. You can go you don't go into the wild mountains to find spirits, although doing it in the mountains is probably a good idea, away from the haunts of man.
Sure.
And you tame it in the same way, and you get it to work for you. The horse will still bite you on occasion or kick you on occasion. The spirit will also sometimes damage you. But in my experience, a spirit is as third party as a horse. Mm-hmm. It's not just part of my psyche, which I figure I can control reasonably well. It is something which has a separate personality, a separate identity, separate objectives.
And so that spirit that you're talking to, there are many different spirits that you can call from many different pantheons, and you have some familiarity with since you have lived in the East for a long time and have studied significantly those systems. There's spirits that are related to their worldview, and there are spirits that are related to the European worldview. Do you feel that those are the same spirits?
No, they're not. Like the stallion you might find in the Rockies is quite different from the pony you might find in the steppes of Asia.
So
let me give you a really concrete example.
Okay.
Chinese magicians out here. One of the reasons I live in the East is because magic is accepted here. I don't have to apologize for being interested in magic. Mm-hmm. I don't have to explain feng shui when somebody asks me to do it for them. In England, you have to give feng shui 101 before you even start, and then they say, oh, can I win the lottery next week? And you have to reorientate their expectations. Out here in Singapore and Malaysia, they know what they want, and they just list to you, I want this, I want my children to pass the exam, I want that, I want that. And you make the changes, and it happens. And let me tell you, in this part of Asia, if you're bullshit at what you do, everybody knows very fast. And so you have to do the results. Now, magicians out here also work like this. Like, for example, down the road from where I used to live, there would be, in one of the lanes there would be a dentist, a doctor, and then there'd be a very interesting label up on the door of a slightly more impressive looking house, which says magician in Chinese, sometimes in Thai as well. And there'll be one or two symbols that you and I would both recognize instantly. And so I got to know some of these guys, and they do it as a profession. They cannot afford not to do it. And they do it for other people. And if they foul up and it doesn't happen, word gets around. And if they really foul up, they probably get lynched by the locals. So, or at least in some parts of Malaysia.
Do you ever do magic for people professionally, or feng shui?
Yeah, I do feng shui for people professionally, and for that I travel around Asia, Hong Kong, Bangkok, etc. I've got long-time clients, and they will call me back again and again. My master in feng shui used to have clients who would pay him every year a salary, a retainer, and they may not ask him for anything in any particular year, but the agreement was, when I need something, you will come and do it rapidly.
Interesting.
And they used to do that. The guy that taught me first, he retired a millionaire. I'm talking US dollars or any currency you like, from working from originally a small office in a back lane, doing feng shui for other people. And he would be retained by politicians, etc., etc. So it's a respected profession here.
What about the magician? Is that also a respected profession, or?
The magicians are rarer. It's a much rarer skill, but the guys who can do it do it. You know, the locals will go to them, and they will charge according to what the person can afford. So if some poor woman goes and says her jewelry's been stolen, can you recover it? He will recover it for her, and the charge will be commensurate, not with the jewelry value, but with what she can afford on a day-to-day basis. If a politician comes and wants something done, then he will pay a big fee, but and that is sort of fair. And so I got to know some of these guys, and I'm getting around to answering your question.
The question, yeah, no, I knew you were. I could tell.
The spirits are different. They have different names, and there are different formulas for binding them. But the method is the same. You still need to call the spirit. You still need to bind the spirit. You still need to charge it with what you want done, and you then need to dismiss it. You don't leave it hanging around. The only distinction is that some of these guys still leave their minor spirits hanging around.
Mm-hmm.
And, in Malaysia, the very small, they're small physically, spirits are called toyos. And one of my magician friends has a number of toyos in his house. And when I'm sitting there talking to him, if I just look sideways suddenly, I can sometimes see them. And I know I'm not inhaling drugs or anything else at the time, but they are really there.
What do they look like to you?
They're diminutive, just small. Faces are quite different from human faces, and the bodies are sometimes 2 or 3 feet maximum, sometimes only 1.5 feet. But anyway, we're not talking about that. I'm answering your question that the spirits are still separate. The spirits are processed in the same way. You still need protection. You still need to call them in a certain way. And they still appear on what the locals call registers. So the Goetia is a register of spirits. Mm-hmm. The local magicians will have a different register. The names on the register will be written in Chinese or Thai. And when you read them out, they sound quite different. So there are many spirits in this world, something I'm sure you would agree with.
Sure.
But those spirits will not respond to a formula that I might try and use on them. But the method of using the formula will still be the same. The Chinese magician, for example, instead of drawing the circle on the floor, will use 28 river-washed pebbles and make his circle out of the pebbles. It's still a circle. He will consecrate it in a similar sort of way, and he will be concerned with what time he actually does the operation. He will not just go and do it. He'll select a particular day and a particular time. And these guys will usually retire to somewhere way away from cities and so forth. Doing magic in your front room in an apartment block, that's really hard. One of my places in Malaysia is actually, well, some people would call it a penthouse, but what it is actually is a house built on top of an apartment block. And so I have gardens on either side. And that's effective because I'm, as it were, up in the air. But if it was an apartment halfway up the block with neighbors crowding in from all sides, that would be much harder work.
Do you have a permanent temple space set up within that space, or?
Yes.
And is that a Western sort of temple that it's a standard ceremonial circle and or something else?
It's Western because I'm a Westerner and I use Western methods. I don't leave my circle set up all the time, ever. I painted my main circle a long time back, and I did it with a friend who was an artist, so he bought the best canvas and the best paints, and so although it's been folded up many times, it still hasn't cracked, or at least not very much. And so I lay that out, do the operation on that, then fold it up and put it away again. Chalk drawing on the floor is hard work.
Yes, very much so.
There's no reason why you shouldn't do it. It's just I'm a bit too old now, I think, to crouch down and do chalk circles. So
once you do it a couple times, you start thinking maybe I should start that canvas method and do this a little bit faster.
Well, this guy Graham in London, we used to do path workings and astral traveling together, so we were pretty much in sync. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You're crazy to redraw it each time. No artist in his right mind would do that." So I said, "Well, go on, give me a hand." So he went and procured the largest piece of canvas, and I mean large. I like to have a lot of room to wander around in the circle.
Sure.
I know you produce small Goetia circles. Am I right in thinking that?
I mean, I produce Goetia circles in a number of different sizes. You can actually get a very small one, which I always wonder what someone is doing with, and all the way up to you're sort of the 9-foot circle that is described.
Mine I hasten to add, is 18 feet across.
That's big.
So that's a 9-foot radius rather than a 9-foot diameter, and in that you can fit several people and
sure.
a bit of furniture
and do you have an altar set up? Do you have a chair set up in there to if it's going to take a long time?
Well, not an altar in the church sense. No blessings take place. But
a double cubed altar like the Golden Dawn style or something like that?
No. At one stage, when I lived in Sussex, I had a double cube altar, which is very sturdy and well built by a carpenter friend of mine. But the trouble with that is the actual working space on the top is not very large. You try laying a sword over the top of a double cube.
Definitely leans out.
You're in trouble. So no, mine is rectangular, but it's a working surface rather than an altar as such. Nothing religious or consecrated about it. But you need somewhere to put candles. You need somewhere to put the incense. There's a lot. The thing about Western magic is it has a lot of bits and pieces. Yeah. And this is really the distinction between magic and mysticism. With something like yoga, and I'm thinking now back to Crowley, who wrote 2 books in book 4. First one he called Mysticism, was just about yoga. And he could do that sitting on the floor in the corner of a room or out on a rocky outcrop with just himself in his head.
Yes.
That's great. Western magic, I haven't got to the point where I can just do it just using my head, because it doesn't work. Not for me anyway. I need a working space and I need equipment. And the fact is that the spirits actually observe the equipment, respect it, and in some cases fear it. And that works for me. A lot of people take the attitude that one should be cuddly with spirits and nice to them.
You don't have that position?
I don't. I have the same thought as you might have with taming a horse. You can cuddle a horse later, but when you want to tame it, you have got to put a bridle on it. You've got to be strict.
That seems reasonable. Yeah, I mean, if you're not dealing with something that is a
Yeah.
friendly thing necessarily.
Yeah, and I don't want the spiritual equivalent of being kicked in the ribs.
Sure. So a lot of people nowadays really get into this very nitty gritty with Solomonic stuff, and they make their own candles and work with calf skin or things that are very sort of rooted in. Do you feel like you'd go that far with things, or do you keep it back from there a little bit?
Okay, so if you think about spirits as external entities,
right,
they're affected by various things. What is the reason for burning one particular incense, not another?
They like it, or it resonates with them, right?
You got it. They like it. Whether you say they resonate or whether they just like it, spirits are attracted to particular smells. They're also turned off by smells. I mean, if you brought manure into the circle, they would go. In fact, it's a standard technique that you can use asafoetida to drive them away. I never wish to do that, except at the end of the ceremony, and in that case, a simple license to depart will do. But they are aware of physical circumstances. They are aware if you're calling a Jupiterian spirit and you're burning musk or something, they will not be particularly happy about that. So you need to provide an atmosphere which is conducive for their comfort. You need to make life comfortable for them. You need to attract them. If you call a solar spirit in a Saturnian hour, that is not comfortable for them. So you need to call them in a time when it's comfortable for them, if you want them to come. I mean, sometimes somebody said to me, well, why should that be? And I said, do you ever go to your doctor at 3 a.m. in the morning? And the answer is no. And why is that? Because it's not his time. And the spirits have particular times, and we do know what they are because the tables are in all the grimoires and people have known for a long time.
Without wanting to quibble too much over details, because I like what you're saying. I don't want to step on your toes and not continue the nice conversation. But like
quibble away.
with for instance the incenses. There's a general sort of thematic connection between a lot of them. But for instance, if we take Heptameron and compare it with Agrippa, there's a lot of places where they don't really agree all that much. So how do you just sort of go with what you feel, or how do you choose which way you would go with it? Because this is something that a lot of people are dealing with when they're trying to get practical with magic. They're like, should I be burning this sandalwood, or should I be burning this frankincense? I don't know. So how do you make that distinction?
Well, you know what science really is. Science is the experimental method. Now, people sort of think that science is opposed to religion and magic. But science is just a method, and I use the experimental method. If one particular incense does not receive, I won't say their approval, but their arrival, then you cross it off the list. And so I experimentally go through and have settled down now on what is the most effective ones for each type of spirit.
So do you have that, your opinion on that shared somewhere in your writings, or is that something that you keep under your hat?
I I keep the more interesting bits under my hat. That is true.
Is there a point when you're going to say, you know what, I'm ready to release this stuff into the world, or is it going to end with you?
There are several solar incenses. There are several lunar incenses of different degrees of effectiveness and so forth, and it's all there it's all out there printed somewhere. So yes, my techniques of Solomonic magic has details of those incenses going right back. And quite often it's because one particular culture didn't get access to Malabrathon, so they used something else. And they've done it experimentally, probably, and when the spirit actually turned up, they found something that worked. And that's the important thing, is to get things that work.
You're bridging us to the next topic here, or one of the next ones that I want to get. So you mentioned when the spirit comes, you know that the incense works, and when the spirit does not come, you know that the incense is not the best for that situation. What is your experience that allows you to know that the spirit has come? What senses does that manifest for you?
What do you mean? How do you know it's
like? Is it do you see a spirit come all the time? Because I know that not everybody sees that all the time. Is there a feeling that comes over you? Is there?
I got the question right. So if nothing happens, it definitely hasn't turned up. I would not waste my time asking a blank space to do things for me. So there are certain subtle and certain not so subtle indications that it's turned up. And these are all physical. So for example, one of the symptoms of a spirit turning up is a sort of swimming appearance in the atmosphere. And I don't mean the incense. I don't believe that incense is necessary for spirit materialization. Incense is necessary to make it comfortable for the spirit and also to define which spirit you want to come. That's one thing. Another thing is a sudden flickering of the light up and down, like somebody turning a dimmer switch up and down.
And you're operating in candlelight though, so that's the candles doing something, or electric lights as well?
In the middle of the day, say 11 o'clock in the morning. And the sun is shining, because here the sun is shining, unless it's raining, the sun is shining all the time. But the light levels will change.
Okay.
So that's another indication. Drop in temperature, everybody's heard of that as an indication, and that's pretty. I mean, I originally tried taking a thermometer into the circle, but in the end, I thought, okay, I can feel if it's getting cold. That's
right.
Loud, the noise of far distant tinkling bell is another sign that the spirit's turned up. And of course, it might be your neighbor ringing the bell. But I can tell you from having done this work well away from people that the distant bell tinkling sound is an indication of spirit arrival. Another indication is, for example, if you're in a house and all the doors and windows are closed, and one door starts slamming, and you kicked all your relatives out, or you didn't have any relatives in the first place, that's quite a clear indication. So these days, because I'm a bit lazy, if I get a decent indication the spirit's arrived, then I proceed from there. Forcing the spirit to materialize is hard work for the spirit. It's much better to use the spirit's abilities to do the things that you want done rather than that. But everybody should at least see a materialization at least once.
So you don't push for that at all?
Well, I don't push for it because as a use of the spirit's limited powers, that's going to use most of them up. So it's good to do it once or twice just to see that you're not gone mad and that the spirit actually is there in the triangle. But there are other things, like, for example, I did an invocation to Aries in an old castle near Bath. And I had the whole building to myself, so I knew there was no external interference. And Aries is linked to birds in an obscure way. And when it came, there was the feeling that birds had been circling around the circle. So yes, we could have all been drunk or otherwise chemically induced. But in the morning afterwards, we went in to clear up, and there was bird shit on the floor, but only outside the circle.
Interesting.
This is a physical manifestation.
Sure, that's quite a good sign.
Not as impressive as having a bird-headed spirit standing in a triangle, but you can't do that every time. At least I can't. There may be some people who can. So yeah, these are some of the signs and symptoms of the spirit actually turning up.
And do you enter into conversation with the spirit, or is it mostly just a one-way thing, because since they're not really very manifest?
Well, that's interesting. You've got to enter a conversation because you've got to get them to agree.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just go and do that. You want confirmation. You in fact want them to take an oath that they will do this, or that they will come back, or whatever it is you want. And I admit that is more likely to be heard in the head rather than on a tape recorder. I've tried doing tape recordings and things like this. The strange thing is that in most cases the tape recorder fails.
Yeah, I've noticed that too.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's my technological inability or whether there's electrical interference in the spirit, but I suspect that. They don't really like that, or it doesn't work, or whatever. But there's definitely, so I gave up tape recording. So if I get an answer, through a scryer, or if I get an answer into my head, or if I get a faintly audible answer, or if I get a sound effect, which, like, will you do this? Bang, bang. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll take that as a yes.
And you mentioned scryers. Do you frequently work with someone operating in a visionary way, or?
Not anymore, but I used to.
And would that scryer be open-eyed looking at things, or would they actually be closed-eyed, having an inner experience of that?
Mostly they'd be looking at a black mirror, mm-hmm. or a crystal. But a good scryer can say, yes, I can see the spirit, and he is here or there, pointing. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, that magic is directional. If you're facing in a particular direction and you're calling a spirit and it turns up behind you, very embarrassing. The scryer will sometimes say, excuse me, it's around the other way, and you have to turn. So that's not, that's actually seeing it in the context of the environment rather than the crystal or the black mirror. But not necessary anymore. I can get enough information without that.
You've moved past that. Have you ever sat and been a scryer for somebody else doing magical operations?
No.
You don't. That's not your thing.
No, I wouldn't be good at that.
It's interesting how many people who are occult writers don't end up being the scryers for them. It seems like it's almost an archetypal thing. Going back, hundreds and hundreds of years, that the sort of the brains of the operation doesn't really want to be the person being the visionary.
Well, it's more than that. It's, you can't control the operation and sit passively to see what the results are. Mm-hmm. The minute your eyes cross and you're sitting passively, then figuratively speaking, you've lost control. You need to remain in control. And the spirits can be a bit tricky. And you've got to drive the whole operation forward. The scryer has the ability to not worry about that. So it's horses for courses. It's like in a plane, you've got a pilot and you've got a navigator. But if you're an experienced pilot, you don't need the navigator. But they're not interchangeable jobs. A good
Sure.
pilot isn't necessarily a good navigator.
So when you're constructing rituals or getting ready to practice rituals, is there a particular sort of ritual formula that you use, is it one from a particular grimoire, or have you put different pieces together to create your sort of the way that you approach it, or how do you construct your ritual?
Okay, so the first one I started with was the Goetia, which is, I suspect most people start
Yes.
with. It has a lovely register of spirits with all sorts of abilities, and it has effective invocations. Now, the invocations are rather degraded. There's whole phrases and sentences missing from them, which I've reconstructed from looking at earlier manuscripts and also asking the spirits, why is this like that? I'm getting a fairly clear answer. I have to add that I don't use that as a method for academic research, because that would not be very good.
Yeah.
Um,
Not popular in
so,
most occult groups either these days. That's unverified personal gnosis. So
yeah. Well, I would say that gnosis wasn't personal; it was on the other side of the circle. But that's we can pass by that. But you're asking me what I use for my private practice, and it would be that kind of grimoire, but with additional information got from other sources. And the formula is there and it works, but it needs to be repaired and boosted to make it work effectively every time, because you don't want to have a hit rate of 1 in 10.
Sure.
You want a hit rate of 9 in 10. And the 10th event was because you inadvertently did it on the wrong day or something else.
Yeah.
Or there was this electrical storm happening outside, and so it wouldn't happen.
The Goetia and a lot of the forms of the Key of Solomon have these sort of multiple conjurations in them, and even more potent conjuration. The constraint or curse. It seems to me from what you're saying, or literally the last thing you just said, that there might be points where you aren't going to succeed because you've made other bad decisions previous to the beginning. But you could, if you go through every single one of those sort of ever increasing conjurations, it's still not going to work, or?
Well, I did say the exception was something like an electrical storm outside, where spirits will just not turn up, or there are a few other atmospheric conditions. One of the reasons I feel that spirits do have an objective existence is they are affected by atmospheric conditions, not just by what's going on in my head. And you rightly say that there are successive, more and more potent conjurations. And spirits are wherever they happen to be, and don't ask me where they live because I have no idea.
Darn. Okay.
Take different amounts of pressure to bring them. I mean, the old grimoires express it as maybe the spirit is bound by another magician. Nowadays, that's not very common. Maybe the spirit is otherwise occupied, etc., etc. It's more likely to be maybe the spirit hasn't effectively been called for 500 years, which was one example I came across, and who then reluctantly turned up, complaining that I'd disturbed his equanimity. He didn't use that word.
So it's a nice word, though.
Yeah. So, yeah, you need to increasingly, and a lot of beginners make the mistake of going, or a lot of beginners start without being properly equipped. They don't make the equipments. People will say, well, why do you need all this? I can visualize a sword in my hand. No, you can't. You can't visualize it to the point where the spirit can actually see it or be frightened of it. Physical equipment is necessary. It's sort of part of the deal. But sometimes you've just got to keep at it. And a lot of beginners go, well, I read 3 conjurations once and nothing happened. So I went and had supper. No, it's hard work. As Stephen Savedale once said, you've got to be physically fit because it's hard work. You might do the first conjuration 3, 4, even 5 times, then move to the second, and so on. And then you need to know why it didn't work. Of course, if you're calling a spirit that is just a fantasy name from Game of Thrones or something, then it won't come anyway. But if you're calling a spirit who has got a name that's in one of the grimoire registers and has been called before, then it just needs giving it a good shove. And a lot of armchair magicians just give up after the first one or two tries. I was lucky because on my first and my second conjuration, which I spent a long time preparing, I got results. So that fixed it for me. I thought, okay, this is something I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I better build a good, strong basis for it. I want to read every grimoire that's ever been written. This is something I'm never going to be able to do because there are far too many. It's amazing. In the 1960s, there were the one or two that were published, the Goetia, the Key of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Most people thought that was it. But now, many long weeks in libraries, I've dug up so many different grimoires. But the method is still the same. The words
One
are
of my first magical books was Waite's Book of Black Magic and Pacts, or maybe, you know, and so there that has a lot of different, you know, bits of grimoires in it at least. So
and
was
the other
that
one,
in print at the time you were?
oh God, yes, that's been in
Yeah,
print since 1890 or something.
yeah, something like that.
The other good collection of stuff was Idris Shah's
Yeah,
Secret Law of
yeah.
Magic. And wandering around a secondhand bookshop in Sydney, I came across that when I was, I don't know, 12 or 13. And I thought, wow. And I spent several weeks pocket money buying it, went home with it. You know, and after that, well, then after the two successful evocations, I was hooked.
And so when you say successful evocations, were they successful in the fact that you had an impressive inner experience, or were you successful in getting a spirit to do something for you outside of that as well?
Well, the second one I have told people about before, so I'll tell you again. I did a lot of preparation, and it was in an old building, and it was very dark, and the candles were not working properly. And anyway, at the climax, a small face about the size of an orange and the color of an orange, with a very annoyed expression, manifested in the air at about my nose level, but outside the circle. And it started voicelessly screaming at me. You know, I couldn't hear anything, but you could see that it was really annoyed. And I thought, oh shit, what have I done? And so, like anybody else, I wouldn't do it now, but in those days, the first thing I did was start banishing, using anything I could. And it only reluctantly left. And I thought, okay, now I haven't got the technique right, but there's certainly something there. So
that awoke a lifelong interest.
Yeah, that was like, there was no point in my life where am I doing nonsense here? It was always, can I do it better? So that was the confirming operation.
And so when you are doing it, it's to this day, how often do you work with spirits at this point?
Well, I've got past the point where I just want to experiment. Can I get it to do this? Can I get it to do that? So basically, it's when I need something that I can't easily get through normal means. And if I can get it through normal means, then I don't go to the enormous effort and time of doing a conjuration. So it will be sporadic now. You know, maybe it's once a month, maybe once in 2 months. In between times, I might do other things like the occasional talisman just for minor operations, but it's not more frequent than that.
Do you have particular spirits that you've created a relationship with, or do you just use the registry towards what you want, and that's what you focus on?
It's register. Sorry, the
register.
Yes. I must stop doing things like
I'll
that.
fix it in editing. Don't worry about it. I won't, but.
Yeah, sorry about that. Cut that.
No worries.
Yeah, it's well, you know that the procedure is to bind the spirit, and the liver spiritum, which is sitting in the triangle, will hopefully get some kind of a smudge or a mark on the open page to indicate that the spirit has accepted.
That's their signature.
Yes. The French magicians turned up the most amazingly elaborate signatures, which I figure they must have written themselves. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. You need some acknowledgement. Once you've got that acknowledgement, once you have bound the spirit, then it will continue to come. So you have the purpose of a liver spiritum is its catalogue of the ones who are bound to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the ones that I use most frequently, because those are the ones I've done the hard work for. They will come much faster now. And I know what the parameters are. The point of going and picking one of the other 70 or several hundred spirits is no longer attractive. In Taoist magic, the idea of taking a new grade is that the person teaching you will give you a new register of spirits. And so you begin again, and you have to demonstrate that you can command every single one of the spirits in that register before they'll give you anything else.
Interesting.
Chinese magicians, a lot tougher. Because
and are those better spirits in the next register, or are they?
Well, I'm not going to publicly say whether Western magic is better than Chinese magic. No.
Oh no, I meant when you graduate from one level to the next.
Yes. Oh yeah, the next register. So in Taoist magic, you might finish up eventually with thunder magic spirits, and those are a lot more powerful.
Interesting.
And somebody using a lower register can be overcome by somebody who has access to a higher register. For example, there's an old story that Michael Sassoed told about a Chinese magician who was actually very fond of drinking whiskey. So he spent a lot of his time quite drunk.
Mm-hmm.
But he was still effective, because the spirits he'd bound were oath to come when he called. So he had a client, and he was a working magician who would accept clients. And a client came in and said, I've been attacked by this guy, and he's sent a spirit against me, etc., etc. And after a few questions, the old magician discovered that it was a spirit from a much lower register. So he did his thing, which we won't go into, and sat down to make his way through another half bottle of whiskey. And while he was waiting, Sasso was there. The other magician staggered in the front door and begged to be forgiven. Because, he'd had a thunder magic spirit sent after him, and he knew when he was done.
He knew it wasn't going to go well
He
for him.
apologized, and everything was thing. So the point of the story is just that the different registers have different degrees of ability.
Interesting.
And they don't just hand the register out to you until you prove you can handle all the ones that you already got. So this is not an initiatory thing, but it is a grade system. But it's not a grade system like Golden Dawn. You don't go into a hall and get initiated. You do your own initiation. You get your control of those spirits, and that is your initiation. And the guy teaching you will know that you've got control of them, and he will pass you the next register. The same thing happens to a lesser extent in the Ars Notoria in the West, where you have to undergo a preliminary experiment with the angels. And it's the angels who will give you the go-ahead or not some external initiator. So the whole idea of, say, Golden Dawn initiations is not really part of magic. It's a Masonic structure, and it's very clever to have a Masonic structure, because that imposes secrecy on people.
Mm-hmm.
You do need secrecy in these things. You no longer get burnt at the stake for them, but you can still get a lot of opposition, let me say, if people understand that you're doing these things. And a lot of sideways looks still in the West, which again is why I like working in Asia, because here my grades are recognized, as it were, on the street. People know what I can do, and they don't ask for anything other than that. It's much more straightforward.
So, just drifting back for a second to the beginning of our conversation, the practical magic in this is like I said, fairly based on the Golden Dawn work, but this is not something that you really would ever do at this point. Then anything that's in this book, other than maybe astral projection.
Yes, I would, because in there's techniques of astral projection.
Mm-hmm. Astral
projection is still a skill that I use.
Yes.
In there, I can't remember what else is in
there. Quite a lot, actually. For it's not a huge book, but it's pretty dense with different things to do in it.
So there's the making of planetary talismans. Yes,
yes, and geomancy is covered pretty decently in here as well.
Yeah. That's Francis's fault, but I got into geomancy and I finished up doing a large book on geomancy and practice and theory, or theory and practice,
mm-hmm.
Which covers most of Western geomancy. And I've come across something very interesting recently. I assumed when I was writing that book and from research that it dated from about the 9th century.
Mm-hmm.
It was Islamic, basically.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
In this part of the world, in Malaysia anyway, because it's an Islamic country, finding these things out is a lot easier, really. But anyway, so I was content that I was right. And then online, somebody produced what they said was a belt from an ancient Egyptian tomb belonging to Princess XYZ. Somebody else on said, well, she must have had a very small waist because it's not that long. And I looked at it and I counted the beads on it, and they were cowrie shells done in gold. And then I remembered that the Ifa used geomancy by throwing a chain, an apuli chain, on the ground, where the cowrie shells in the chain will be either one way up or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized this is an apili chain from ancient Egypt. So this technique didn't begin in the 9th century. It went back to at least 2000 BC.
Interesting.
So I did make a few changes in one of the chapters in my book, but I haven't got the time really to go into all of that.
And not in this interview, no. There's a. Do you feel like the symbols were, similarly? I mean, I know there's 16 possible permutations, but do you feel like they were doing the same thing, or just it's just a similar technique, but the actual meanings of everything have changed drastically over time?
No, if you've got open and closed cowrie shells, I think the meanings would be roughly the same. I mean, I can't vouch for the Egyptian meanings, but I can vouch for the Islamic. I don't read Arabic very well, but I can tell you that from some of the early Arabic texts, the meanings
it's largely fixed, the meaning?
Yeah, if it's rubaeus or albus, then it's red or white.
Mm-hmm.
You don't find that it's fairy godmother or birds or Christmas cake. It's either red or white. If it's Tristitia or Letitia, then it's sadness or happiness.
Right.
These things don't change. They're archetypal. There's room for misspelling the word or something like that, but there's not much room for anything else. So the system has retained its method and its symbolism all the way through.
And feng shui, that's a big part of who you are as a person as well, as a as a magician and as a human. How does that integrate with the spirit magic? Is it just a completely different compartment in your mind, or is it?
Doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't integrate. The two things do completely different things. Feng Shui is concerned with the physical house, the physical buildings, the physical tomb. It's concerned with changing the luck of the occupants, and I mean luck in a more general sense. Magic is concerned with achieving certain real-world changes. So they don't interact. I mean, people who ask me, if somebody asked me, do I use Feng Shui to produce a sacred space to do magic in? And I just couldn't even begin to think how to answer that.
Well, I'm glad I didn't ask it. Actually, I'm wondering, like in the world views, do they you feel like they're just in two different planes? They don't even interact with each other at all.
I mean, it's like cookery and gardening. You stir them, you rake the soil, or you stir the cake. There's some human parallels there,
right?
But you certainly wouldn't mix up the methods. Or like physics and chemistry.
Okay.
You know, science has been around for a while. It's only very recent. No, you don't get anybody using chemical formula to explain physics, or physics formula to explain chemistry.
Sure.
It's not a different department of the human mind. It's a different skill. I mean, each of these, I would say, is a technique. The ancient Greeks used the word technique to explain a particular set of skills. Magic was a technique. Probably cookery was a technique. I don't know. And you don't mix them up really. So there you go.
I completely understand what you're saying. I think they neither blend nor contradict one another. They're just two different things.
I tell you what mixes them up. It's New Age thinking.
Oh, that was what I wanted to ask you, is because you actually introduced Feng Shui to the West to a certain extent, and you don't feel that great about how it has turned out. So how did it go wrong?
No, I did introduce it in my first book. Explained mostly grave Feng Shui and land form and landscape form Feng Shui, and it was used by the aristocratic class to place their mansions in the correct place in the valley, to increase the fertility of the valley, to increase their crops, the number of children they had, which is another one of their crops as far as they were concerned, to increase their money, etc., etc. And somehow, from that, you then come down to, okay, nobody really has mansions in the middle of whole valleys anymore, or if they do, they're not people that you happen to know on a daily basis. I'm sure there are people like that. And so Feng Shui sort of came down to the house. And you can do an awful lot with Feng Shui of the house. You can orientate its direction it's facing and things like that to improve the life of the people inside. But I won't say you Americans, but it was an American movement, went down into changing the flowers and not having bookshelves, which are cutting, and generally took it down to a level of nonsense.
Yeah, you don't think that what people are doing with it now makes any sense?
Well, maybe it makes sense. I mean, it's good interior decorating. Fine, I can relate to that. But to say that Feng Shui is minimalism is not true. Feng Shui is not particularly concerned about how many books are stacked on the table or whatever else. Feng Shui is concerned about the sort of qi that comes in the front door and where it circulates. And in any house, the qi coming through the front door will accumulate in one or two spots. And those are the spots that you want your desk in, or those are the spots you want your bed in. And there are other spots where it doesn't accumulate and will not do you any good. You want to sleep in a place which makes you wake up in the morning full of life, with good plans in your head. You don't want to sleep in a part of your house where the exact opposite works. So yes, interior Feng Shui is important from that point of view, but it's not about blessing a candle or doing something like that.
What about, there's a bunch of little trinkets and stuff that people have, coins and mirrors and stuff like that. Is that something that you are in support of or opposed?
Small is not good.
Okay.
Let me give you a couple of anecdotes. Feng Shui depends upon the 5 Chinese elements:
Hmm.
metal, water, wood, earth, etc. So there's a lot of emphasis on putting coins here, coins there, and so forth. In Singapore, feng shui masters will do whole buildings, or they will do whole restaurants to improve it. For example, one of the largest hotels in Singapore set up a perfectly nice restaurant, hired an expensive cook, and produced some great food. I know, I've eaten there, and nobody came, or 20% of the tables are occupied. So they called in a feng shui master, and he explained to them that the element that was missing was metal. So they said, "Oh, well, should we hang 5 metal coins near the front door?" He said, "No. It's a big restaurant. You need a big change. So you need big metal." So what did they do? They bought a diesel engine, huge metal thing, sandblasted it and painted it and put it right in the middle of the restaurant.
So just a big hunk of metal.
Yes, and he said, "Great, that's exactly right." And within a week, the number of people eating in that restaurant increased until it was having queues outside. Now, that sounds like magic, but it's not. It's feng shui.
It's not about the same thing as magic, because there's no spirits involved, it sounds like.
Exactly. And also, it's a question of size. People who, hang up a few coins here, a few coins there. Okay, that's very nice. But you need to concentrate a particular element to get it to work. I'll tell you another feng shui secret. Water is a big thing. If you place water in the wrong place, things will go bad for you. In fact, the water will probably go bad fairly rapidly.
We have a lot of water problems in my house, and actually there's a lot of magicians have that. I've heard a lot of stories of magicians having water issues going on in their homes. Yeah.
What sort of problems?
We've had some flooding. We've had leaking pipes. Just all sorts of different things. Basically, we had to change our roof because we were, there's been a bunch of water problems over the years.
Okay. Well, water is one of the
redid the plumbing.
Oh, right. Well, I was in one building where there was feng shui changes being made, and the whole sewage system flooded in the basement. They made the wrong feng shui change.
I guess so.
You can have water problems without having feng shui, but the two are connected because, and here's the secret, qi, which is part of feng shui, actually rides with water. So by placing water in a particular place, you automatically increase its qi. You put it in the wrong place and you'll have the reverse. So you put the fish tank in one place, the water will go bad, the fish will die. You put it in another place and the fish will, for example, here, my internal fish tank, it's had 2 little fish in it for a long, long time, no dying, very healthy, etc., etc., because it's in the right place. But I put it in the wrong place for 2 weeks and had exactly the reverse. So I like to experiment, sometimes to my own cost. But yeah, so water is important, metal is important.
If people want to find a resource that you feel is a good resource in English, is there one of your books that's a good introduction to it, or some other resource?
On feng shui?
Yeah.
Okay. I've done...
I know you've done a bunch.
I've done a bunch, including 4 that were translated from classical Chinese, which took me a lot of time. The best one to buy is the Flying Star Feng Shui, because by me.
Flying Star?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds a bit Fantasyland. It sounds a little bit Disney, but it's not. It's a technical word. The Chinese refer to Feng Shui forces as stars. So Flying Star Feng Shui.
Okay.
Or if you're feeling adventurous, Advanced Flying Star Feng Shui. That deals mainly with the Feng Shui inside the house. And it explains how you make these changes or how you don't make these problems for yourself. Then if you wanted background, Feng Shui, the Living Earth Manual will give you classical Chinese background.
And that's your first book on the subject?
Yeah, it was. I did that in 1976.
Well, I don't want to keep you prisoner here forever, but so I want to plug a couple of things for you that I really love that you created. Your two books, the techniques. I look at this so much. I normally keep dust jackets on, but I look at this like every day, so I eventually had to take this. This is the techniques of Greco-Egyptian magic. Such a cool book. Particularly, I love you have just dozens of charts in this thing that sort of by specific kinds of rituals, so that you can find. I mean, the Greek magical papyri are a rather intimidatingly diverse group of things, and you've really made it so clear to be able to dive in there. It's wonderful.
If you start trying to read them in the Betts edition from the beginning to the end, it's just confusing.
It's very
little things and big things and so forth. And the problem is the translation. The translators are academics. For the academics, magic is a bit, well, that's poo-poo, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So the Greeks have between 40 and 60 technical terms for different sorts of magic. The ancient Greeks, modern Greeks have no idea. And so the academics would look at them and they'd say, well, what? Oh, I know, we just translated a spell.
Mm-hmm.
So everything in there says it's a charm or a spell in the Betts edition. And I thought this cannot be right, because some of these things are telling you to do something and some are telling you something else. So I went through and read the ancient Egyptian magical papyri in Greek and pulled out what effectively head words. So it's at the top of each spell, it tells you what it's supposed to do. This is a love spell.
Right.
This is a compulsive love spell. This is whatever it is. So I figured out what the Greek words, and then I separated them. So the book you just held up, different types of spells are together. And this is me applying a scientific method to it. Thank you for holding it up. That's always good.
It's a wonderful. I feel like I could have a totally separate, long conversation exclusively about this book, but I'm trying to keep these interviews along a similar theme. But I just wanted to mention that I really do love this book, and I love the companion book, which is actually, did you write that one first? Is that correct, or publish it first?
The two books were actually my thesis.
Right, but you've kind of like made it a little bit more readable in the book.
Yes, I took out all the academic shit.
Yeah.
I would argue that, and I would cite this and cite that.
Right.
All this is very boring. So I stripped all that out and just went to, this is what it is,
But both great books.
Well, this is why they're called techniques of Solomonic magic, techniques of Greco-Egyptian magic, because that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in how many witches they burned, or not really anyway. I'm interested in, well, what did they do? What were their techniques? The trouble with witchcraft is the witches were usually not very literate, and so they didn't write them down. So you don't, it's very difficult to find that out.
And they were tortured about what they were doing, so they probably weren't giving the best answers even when they did reveal what they were doing. So.
In the end, they would just be giving any fantasy to get stop the wreck from stretching me one more inch.
Right.
The rack, rather. So, yeah, so that's one of the reasons why grimoire magic is important, because the documentation is there. There are hundreds, probably thousands of grimoires, which is because there were many hundreds of magicians doing it, and each one copied before the era of printed books had been.
Right.
It's really Mathers who started printing them. He printed the Key of Solomon. The French printed some of the other grimoires earlier, in French, of course. But Mathers started it, and like you rightly said, A.E. Waite also did a book with grimoires in it, and Idris Shah, and that all happened in the 1890s, 1910s.
Right, really all in the same this one little time period that people started putting them out.
And then Crowley came and said that spirits are actually parts of your brain, not even parts of your psyche, but parts of your
parts
brain.
Of the brain, yeah. I honestly don't know that he meant that as literally as people like to take it. I think that he was
trying to sound scientific, without a scientific basis.
Right.
So he grabbed onto psychology and thought, this is the coming science. This is how magic is going to be explained. So he was right up to a point. And he fluctuated between the spirit hypothesis and the psyche hypothesis all of
Right.
his life. If
Oh,
you look
very
at
much
it,
so. Yeah.
even in Magic in Theory and Practice, some chapters are taking this approach and others are taking others. And in the end, he had a dilemma. Like, he received Book of the Law from Aries. Is Aries an independent third-party spirit, in which case it's a revelation? Or is Aries part of my own brain, in which case it's just psychological masturbation? So he never quite resolved which way it was. So but his work saying that that spirits are part of the brain, that really destroyed research into magic for most of the 20th century. And it's only at the end of the 20th century that people like myself and David Rankin started resurrecting the old grimoires and putting them back into their central as part of magic.
That's another important body of work that you're responsible for, is the source works of ceremonial magic, I believe it's called. A series. Do you have like 12 of them at this point or something?
Yes, yeah. The 12th one is being published now.
I mean, just amazing stuff that is, it's published beautifully. There's a lot of fantastic insights in there, and also presentation of stuff that isn't presented elsewhere, or it's not, at least it's not presented as cleanly elsewhere in a lot of times. So just wonderful contributions that you've made to the field and to the understanding of things. And it's been a fantastic time listening to you, and I want you to stay on once I stop this. But before I even do, is there anything that you want to sort of let people know about that you're currently working on or releasing that you're excited about?
Well, yes, I am. I'm working on the Ars Notoria, which I produced already a semi-academic volume on it, the note in full color and so forth. And I wanted to show you some of these in full color.
Oh wow! Yeah, those are gorgeous.
So then I worked on the one manuscript which had the method. Most of them don't have the method. And so I produced a second volume on Ars Notoria, which is Ars Notoria, the method, which actually gives you the keys to using it. Because before that, the Turner translation was very great on translating the Latin prayers, but didn't bother to transcribe all of the invocations. So they're not there.
Interesting.
So now, so it could never be used based on Turner's translation. And otherwise you have to read Latin, and really cramped, horrible Latin, not just nice printed Latin. And so I reluctantly dived in, and I've produced a book on the method, which divides it up according to the subject. And I've applied a scientific framework to it. I've cut out a lot of the shit, quite frankly, shit. And that's my next book.
Wonderful. And when's that going to be coming out?
Well, it's at the printers at the moment.